Hi, you're listening to the Grace House Podcast. We are a little country church in Clinton, Arkansas, and our mission is to glorify God in love and worship, to love one another, to teach and equip disciples for Christ, to encourage the church to do something great for God, to saturate the earth with the gospel so that multitudes will be saved. Thanks for joining us, and here's our pastor, Terry Simpson.
I read through the notes that Kim written out, and I got to the last line. I thought, I'm never going to forget this line. You don't have to look at it. She's going to talk to you about it. That's when wrestling becomes worship. That is a powerful line. I'm not getting tired because I'm worshiping in this wrestling. Amen. Come on, girl. Let's hear it.
Hear me? Yeah, okay. A little bit, sort of. Well, I'm going to apologize up front. Kind of like Robert said in class this morning, he's on a sugar high. Well, I'm on a sinus medication high. So if any of this doesn't go well, that's why. It's because I feel like I'm floating over here instead of right here. But it's going to be fine. All right. So last time I talked to you about running the race and told you that, I had barely ever run in my real life, but that I explained then, how we all run the spiritual race and that we have to focus on our own lane. Well, tonight I want to talk to you about something that I've never done in my entire life, and that is wrestling. So at least I haven't done that in my real life. In our spiritual lives, we all wrestle, either with our circumstances or our doubts, or sometimes even with God himself. So we've all had that moment where at 2:00 in the morning, you're awake, you've been awake, or he wakes you from, your strong sleep, and you're staring at the ceiling or staring into the dark, and your mind is just spinning, and all you can think of is, why is this happening? Or why is this happening to me? Yeah. Or where is God? Well, where is he in this moment? Can I trust him with this problem that I've got? Well, tonight I want to show you that wrestling with God, not against him, but with him, can actually be a form of worship. So I'm hoping that by learning these 4 steps that we're going to talk about, that you can do 2 things. One, you'll be able to look back at your past struggles and you'll be able to see where maybe these 4 steps all fit in, because that's what I've done with mine. And then also in your future struggles, because we all know that you're going to struggle, there's no getting away around it, that you will have maybe a different frame of mind, because you'll know what these 4 steps are. And so you'll be able to see like where you are in the process and kind of what's to come and what can be, the positives out of it. So we're going to begin with Jacob's story, and it's in the Old Testament in Genesis 32, if you want to look there. 32 verses 24 to 32. So it's midnight beside the river, and Jacob is completely alone. And he's alone because he has sent everyone else, all of his family, all of his possessions, all of his servants, everyone is gone because he took them all over the river. And he is all alone in the camp. And the reason for this is because, God had told him that he was to go back home to where his father was and that he would be with him. But he knew that going back home meant that he had to see Esau again. And he did not leave him on good terms. He stole his birthright. He deceived his father. And it's been 20 years, but he's pretty sure that Esau still has, revenge in mind. So he is there at the river, completely alone, but he's, terrified of what's going to happen. So if we look at verse 24. This left Jacob all alone in the camp, and a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he could not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of its socket. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. He replied, Jacob. Your name will no longer be Jacob, the man told him. From now on, you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won. Please tell me your name, Jacob said. Why do you want to know my name? The man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God, for he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared. The sun was rising as Jacob left Peniel, and he was limping because of the injury to his hip. So let's look at those 4 steps that we said. So the steps are struggle, search, surrender, and scar. So the first step is struggle. So this wasn't a casual scuffle, a wrestling match like you might see at a high school or something. Instead, this was an intense, desperate fight, the kind where you're fighting for your very life. So hour after hour, the entire night. Can you imagine the entire night fighting with someone? And so, but notice that God didn't rebuke Jacob for wrestling. Instead, he engaged with him. He wrestled back. So all night long, and that's what's really interesting to picture is imagine the creator of the universe getting down in the dirt and wrestling with a frightened, broken man, because that's where Jacob needed to meet him. And so there Jacob was fighting for his life, and it wasn't until dawn that he realized that he had been wrestling with God the whole time. So his struggle shows us that you can't wrestle from a distance. Wrestling requires you to be all in, breath to breath, holding on, even if you're not sure why. And I apologize, I'm going to have more to drink than normal. That sinus medication does it dumber on you. Sorry. All right, second, search. So the second step is all about searching, and that's where the wrestling will reveal what you're really holding on to. So when God dislocates Jacob's hip, any rational person would let go. If I'm hurting, I'm not holding on. But Jacob doesn't do that. Instead, even in excruciating pain, he holds on and says, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. Okay? So this reveals what he was really holding on to. He had spent his entire life grasping and scheming and trying to secure his blessings through his cleverness. He never expected God to help out. He always thought he could do it. So his name actually means deceiver. So he had been that way his whole life. So now he's broken. He's desperate. He can't think of a way out of this. He's already tried several ways. He's sent all these gifts ahead of him, hoping that Esau will be, okay with it, but he's not sure. So he's having to finally trust in God's grace. And this is what wrestling does. When you wrestle with God, it peels back the layers and it reveals what you're actually clinging to. It shows us that we're trying to be our own God. It shows us that maybe we're trying to do things in our own strength instead of trusting in Him. And it exposes then what we're really searching for, and even what we might have to give up or release in order to find it. So that moves us then to the third movement, or the third step, and that's surrender. Notice that God doesn't ask Jacob what he wants. He says, what is your name? And so for the first time in his whole life, Jacob actually tells the truth about himself. He finally acknowledges it. He doesn't scheme. He doesn't deceive. He just honestly admits, I am Jacob. I am a deceiver. And so this moment of brutal honesty becomes his moment of surrender. He stops trying to earn his blessing through manipulation or deceit, and he admits that he has a desperate need, a need for God. So he finally releases that grip on needing to control things on his own and instead reaches for grace. Then comes the last moment, which is scar. So no one's going to leave a wrestling match unchanged. So there's always going to be a scar. And for Jacob, it meant that he was going to walk forever with a limp because of his hip. So every step for the rest of his life was going to remind him of that night where he faced God face to face, and he lived to tell about it. So there's two things about his limp. One, it was not a punishment. Instead, it was his testimony. It was proof that he had encountered the living God and he had been transformed. His weakness became his witness. And God gives him a new name in the process. He calls him Israel, which means he who wrestles or struggles with God. Can't you imagine the stories that he could tell? Because you know that every time that he walked up to somebody new, they were going to say, "Oh, what's wrong with you? What's happened to you? Why are you limping?" And he was going to have a story to tell them. Second of all, though, his limp had another purpose. It also kept him humble, and he really needed that. He could never again, solely on his own strength or cleverness, rely on himself. He was now going to have help from others, because if you're limping around and you're traveling hundreds of miles like he was, you're going to have help. And he was going to need God more than anything. So this was a permanent reminder of where his true strength came from. Now we're going to move to a second story. And this time we're going to move to another midnight, another man alone, but this time it's in a garden. So if you'll go with me to Luke 22, verses 39 to 44. Luke 22, verse 39. Then, accompanied by the disciples, Jesus left the upstairs room and went as usual to the Mount of Olives. There he told them, "Pray that you will not give in to temptation." He walked away about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Then an angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. He prayed more fervently, and he was in such agony of spirit that his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. Now, in Mark 14, verse 33, he describes it a little differently. He says that Jesus became deeply troubled and distressed. He told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." He went on a little farther and fell to the ground. He prayed that if it were possible, the awful hour awaiting him might pass him by. "Abba, Father," he cried out, "everything is possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." So again, let's look through the 4 steps. So we start with struggle. So here in the garden, Jesus is in anguish, which is a Greek word that means something similar to an athlete straining every muscle in competition. So this was not a quiet prayer time for him like he normally had. Instead, he was wrestling with the Father's will. He knew what lay ahead, and he had a human desire of avoiding that. Yeah. So when he said, "Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me," he was using raw, honest words like we would use. Basically, he was saying, "I don't want to do this. Is there any other way we can do this? Let's go back to the drawing board and try to find a new way." So his sweat then became like drops of blood, which is actually a real medical phenomenon where extreme psychological stress causes the tiny blood vessels to rupture near your sweat glands. So Jesus wasn't just having a bad day. His body was literally breaking down under the weight of what he was about to face. And so how does the Father respond to that? Does he condemn his son and say, "Why are you questioning me? Why are you seeking a different path than what we have planned out?" No. Instead, he sends an angel to strengthen him. Yeah. That is wonderful and beautiful. So then we move to search. So what does this struggle reveal about Jesus? What did he really, really want? Well, one, he kind of wanted to avoid this. The human part of him did. Okay? He really did not want to face the horror of the cross. But it also revealed the depth of his love and his commitment to something that was going to cause him more than just discomfort. So in that garden, he faces the same question that we face when we're wrestling. Will I trust God's plan, even if I don't understand it? Will I surrender my will to his, even if I know it's going to lead to suffering? So the surrender. So he takes 3 different times of prayer, and he reaches the place of surrender. He tells his Father, not my will, but yours be done. Now, notice about his surrender that this did not make the cross any easier. It just made it possible. His struggle prepared him for the greatest act of surrender in human history. Now, this is the paradox of surrender. Surrender doesn't eliminate the difficulty. Just because you say, okay, God, I give it over to you, that doesn't mean your problem goes away. Okay? Instead, it transforms, though, your relationship to the problem or to the struggle that you're having. So when we stop fighting against God's plan and we start wrestling with him instead of against him, then everything changes. So our struggle's not going to magically go away, but we will find that Jesus will walk with us in our struggle and that he will shoulder a lot of the burden for us. Then we have the scar. And so with Jesus, we know he still has the scars. Okay? Literally. So in John 20, verse 27, he tells the doubting Thomas, put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand and put it into my side. So Jesus' scars become his credentials. He was able to walk around and show all the people who he really was and that he did come back to life. So they're the proof of his love. They're the evidence of his victory over death. And so these wounds don't represent defeat, they represent triumph. But what really strikes me is that, someday we're going to have a glorified body. And I'm excited about that because that's going to be a body that's not going to have all these aches and pains and problems and whatever. But, Jesus has a glorified body, but he chose to keep the imperfections, to keep the wounds. So, he keeps those scars because they tell the story of redemption. So I just think that's another beautiful moment. All right, so we've seen how 2 times at least in the Bible that we have these 4 steps. Now we're going to look at some personal ones. So first we'll begin with me. All right, so in mine, like Jacob, was a time when I felt completely alone. And ironically, this was the first month of my marriage. And so Johnny and I got married on July 3rd, 1995. And so we had planned to elope because I'm from 4 hours from here, Crothersville, Missouri, very near where Terry was born in Dyersburg. Anyway, so about 4 hours from here. And so I did not want either of our sides to have to drive 4 hours. Okay. And that might be the only reason, I don't know. But anyway, and so we decided to elope and we were going to go to Disney World for our honeymoon. So we were going to get married somewhere between here and there. We were just going to randomly pick a place and get married. We thought that would be cool. Well, when we went to get the marriage license in Blytheville, Arkansas, I think it was on a Monday even. It was really weird. There was a thunderstorm. And for whatever reason, we were in the car and the rings were there. And I was like, you know what? We have the rings. We're getting the marriage license. Why don't we just do it today? So we did. So we got married on July 3rd, 1995, during the middle of a thunderstorm in a courthouse. And it was my grandma's birthday. So we then had to share, the holiday, that perfect day. Anyway, and we went back to my mom's house and she didn't believe us at all. So then we had to go back out in the car in the rain to get the marriage certificate and show them. And then they left there and went and bought a mattress so that we could sleep together for the first night. Was that not the sweetest thing? Anyway, okay, too much. Moving on. Sorry, that was not part of the story that I planned on sharing. Okay. So anyway, now I got to figure out where I left off. So we got married, we went to Disney World, we came back. So I had spent the whole summer, we decided we would move here, okay? Because at that time, he was making more money than me, and I had a teaching job, and you can teach anywhere where what he was doing was a lot harder to try to find a job with. So I moved here, well, not yet. But anyway, so I started interviewing at different schools around here, trying to get a job. Didn't get one. School was fixing to start. I was still living with my parents in Missouri, and Johnny was still living with his mom in Arkansas. And so here we were married, living 4 hours apart. And so 4 days before school was to start, Polly Johnson calls me and says, "Hey, a teacher just quit and the other teacher moved up to high school, so we have an opening. Do you want it?" I was like, "Yes, I do." And so I got my stuff, packed it up, and moved down here. Well, there I was, a newlywed, no home, a new job, a husband who worked 4 days a week out of town, so I didn't even see him, and so I was living with my mother-in-law and her family for about a month, maybe 2 months. I don't even remember. But anyway, it was not the best way to start your marriage. But here's where my struggle came in. So my struggle was that I was 4 hours away from home. I had never in my life been away from home more than 5 days, ever. During college, I came home every single weekend. I bummed as many rides as I had to. It didn't matter, till I got a car. And so I was deeply homesick. I mean, deeply, because this was back in the day where it costs a lot of money to call home. I got to call home once a week and talk to my mom. Oh, and I'm going to tear up if I think of that. Okay. Anyway, so there I was, an introvert, a new place, a new job, no friends, nothing, and no husband most of the week, living in a back bedroom, where I just stayed by myself all the time. So I cried every night for the whole first year of school. It's okay. It's all right. I'm over it now. Menopause will do that for you. It'll just take all that crying right away. All right. So then I was wrestling really hard with God because I was like, did I make a mistake? Have I moved to the wrong place? We should have moved back there. At least I would have had family. There were all kinds of things that were bad about moving here. And I just wanted some friends. I needed somebody to talk to, and so during the searching time, God revealed to me that this wasn't all just about wanting a friend. Okay. So I learned the not so pretty part about me. And that was that I really just wanted control. I wanted control over my life. I wanted control over my friendships and the people around me. I came from a very close family. Like, we were together all the time. My grandma, they pretty much raised us when my parents were at work. She babysat us and stuff. And so I was as close to her as I was my parents. We ate over there 3 nights a week. Like, we were together all the time. And so I was deeply homesick. And really, I just wanted some friends who were like me. Like, I wanted ones who had personalities like mine. They wanted to do things like I like to do, and they liked my lifestyle. And I didn't want to fit into anybody else's life. What are you talking about? I wanted them to fit into my life. And so I learned during this process how selfish I was and how socially immature I was at the time. I was 25, so you're supposed to be immature at that point. But I also wanted full friendships immediately. Like, I didn't want to build a friendship. Who wants to do that? I wanted pre-made ones. I wanted to meet you and go, "Oh, you're my best friend." And we would hang out and talk and do stuff, Well, anyway, so I wanted people like my family who just, we were close, we bonded. And so this struggle exposed my impatience, my selfishness, and my desire to control my circumstances and all the people around me. So anyway, I had lots of stuff wrong with me. All right. So then I come to the surrender. Almost. I first had to make some mistakes. I'm kind of like Abraham, where if things don't come fast enough, you try to put your will in there first, see what you can do first. So when I didn't make any friends immediately, like I thought I would, I started by trying to make friends with all the different people at school, and so I would try to force myself on them. Anyway, that didn't work out. So then I decided that Johnny was going to be my best friend. Your husband's supposed to be your best friend, right? Well, not when he's away 4 days a week and you only get to talk to him for 5 minutes on the phone on Tuesday nights. I mean, that was all we could afford, 5 minutes on Tuesday nights. And then when he came home, he just wanted to hunt and fish. So it just was not meant to be for us to be best friends. It's better now that he's retired. We're a little bit closer now. All right. But so I felt really guilty, that I was doubting God and that, I was trying to do all these things on my own instead. But again, just like with the other two stories, God didn't condemn me for wrestling. He didn't condemn me for asking or questioning or struggling during all this. He didn't tell me to stop crying, although I wish he would have made me stop crying. And he didn't, tell me I just needed a better attitude or that I could be a better person, and then the friends would come. Instead, he honored my request, my struggle, by meeting me right there in the tears. So he heard my cries. Who is it that heard the cries? Hagar. Thank you. Hagar. That's what it makes me feel like, when you hear her story. He heard my cries. And he gave me a double portion. So just like Job. So I got not one best friend, I got two best friends. And they met all the needs and all the things that I was wanting. It was really weird how all that happened. So like Tammy, she was my first best friend. And so she was the one who was the instant one. Like we met, we clicked, like everything was just perfect. We could talk for hours and hours and hours on the phone or through email because she had to move away for a couple years and move back. But like we were like family to begin with. And so we kind of grew up together because we had kids the same age and we did everything together. Or actually hers are about 2 years older than mine. And so she would do things with her kids and I'd learn from her mistakes. And then my kid, anyway. But, and then now we actually are family because we share two beautiful grandbabies together. Anyway, because our kids got married. So yay. And then God blessed me with a second best friend. So that's Amanda, if you can't tell. Anyway, with Amanda, it wasn't the pre-made automatic, right up front thing because she's a little bit younger than I am. And so she came a little bit later to the church and stuff, and her kids are younger than mine. Okay. So we didn't have all those things in common right away. But as our kids got older and stuff and kind of did their own things, we've had more free time. And so we've kind of bonded. And of course, we've definitely bonded through our spiritual lives. Okay. And that makes a whole different kind of friendship. So we've definitely leaned on each other in times of trouble the last couple of years. And we're accountability partners to each other, prayer partners. And now that we go to different churches than our husbands, we walk this path together, and we're proof that God knew exactly what both of us needed and put us together, because next is going to be her story. But let me do the scar first of mine. So my scar through all of this is just a recognition of who I truly am. So, we all like to put on that front that we're okay and everything's good. But, God showed me that, kind of like with Jacob, I finally admitted that I was way more selfish than I ever thought I was. And so this scar changed my marriage because I was always thinking about me. When are you going to meet my needs? And I will say, we struggled a lot in those first few years of our marriage. And a lot of it was because of me. So, it started forcing me to ask, what does he need from me? Maybe he needs some stuff too. Maybe he's lonely. Maybe maybe it's really hard working off 4 days a week and then coming home to a wife who maybe hasn't got your castle already yet or whatever, And then, the scar also changed how I raised my kids because, we really like for our kids to fit our expectations. Yeah. Well, I had to kind of give up some of those expectations because they're not exactly like what I thought they would be, but that's okay because they have their own lives and their own paths and their own lane, we'll say. from the last time. So those are some of the things that God has taught me. Now, the last story that I want to share is Amanda's. So I'm very honored to share her story. So Amanda's story begins the same year that I moved here in 1995. And so while I was crying that I didn't have a friend, Amanda was on the other side of town crying for a whole different reason. So the world that she knew ceased to exist when her brother Sherman was killed in a car wreck that year. So at the time, he was 17 and she was 19. And before that tragedy, she lived a very sheltered, safe life where nothing bad ever happened because she loved everything about her life, her family, the things that went on. Even though they were poor, like they had each other and that's all they needed. But that night showed her that the worst was now a possibility. And she learned that sometimes bad things do happen to good people. And this made her struggle in her faith because nothing made sense anymore. So she wasn't sure that she could trust God with all the important things. And she found herself trying to do everything on her own until she would become desperate enough that she would finally reach out to God, or she would finally trust that God's way was the best way. And there was always that fear that things wouldn't work out the way she wanted. So fear and worry have played a huge role in her life for all those years, for 30 years now. But life goes on, as it always does. And so in 2000, she met Dale, and they got married in 2001. Abby came along in 2002, and Ashley in 2003. And as a family, they attended church at Choctaw. And so going to church as a family was very comforting for her, because that was one of the best things she remembers about growing up, was her family going to church together and sitting in that one pew on the certain side, on the certain pianos. Anyway, she tells it better than I do. But, you know, it was just that resemblance of an old way of life that she was missing and that she still longed for. And so it was very comforting that she now had her own family and she could start those same traditions with them. And so this is also, though, where she met me. And I eventually became her Sunday school teacher, which will play a role in the story a little later. So 22 years after Sherman's death, she found herself wrestling with God again, but this time it was over a different kind of loss, one that would require her to choose between staying safe or stepping into the unknown. So her struggle began in 2017. So at this point, she was going to church at Choctaw, but she was starting to feel very spiritually dry. Both of us were, but this is her story. And she sensed that God was wanting her to leave the church. And for 2 whole years, she fought. She fought tooth and nail against it. Because she kept questioning God. Why in the world are you wanting to separate me from my family, from my husband and my children, the most important things in my life? You know, you put me here, put us there as a family. That was comforting. Now you're wanting to split us up? Like, what is that all about? And so she had already experienced the devastation of losing her brother and watching her family have to navigate that grief. And so she couldn't bear the thought of any kind of family division. So the situation seemed impossible. There was no way that her husband, Dale, would leave the church. He had been going there pretty much his whole life. And so his life was there, his friendships, his identity. He was an elder. And Amanda didn't want to be the reason that he'd have to step down from that, because he had already told her that if you leave, I will no longer be an elder. I won't feel that it's okay to do that. And so she knew that he was a gifted, that was his gift, was to be an elder, and that he was needed at the church. But as the months wore on, Sundays, instead of being the day of rest that they're supposed to be and the day of worship, they turned into a spiritual battleground in their marriage. And Amanda was slowly dying on the vine. So the search stage. So like Jesus in the garden, Amanda found herself in a desperate place, all alone. trying to find a way forward that wouldn't tear her family apart. So she was desperate for a compromise. So she decided, like we do, because we instead of letting God decide for us, we decide we're going to try our own things. So kind of like me with trying to force my friends. She did the same thing. So she decided that as long as she went to church at Choctaw on Sunday mornings, that was okay. She could go other places on Wednesday nights and Sunday nights and still feel like she was with her family. And so that didn't work out as well as she thought it would. So she felt instead this split loyalty only left her more parched. And she still was craving something. She just couldn't name it, but it was getting worse and worse all the time. And so by 2019, she reached her breaking point, but she still couldn't make herself leave. So now she decided she'd compromise a different way. Now she would go Wednesday nights and Sunday nights somewhere else. And on Sunday mornings, she would still come to my class because she just couldn't bear the thought of leaving Kim behind. Even though I told her a million times, at least a million, that I'm going to be fine. Would you just go? Like, you're driving me crazy. Go, 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 go. Anyway, she wouldn't. So she was going to go to Sunday school there, and then she was going to leave there, skip out on that church to come over here so she could make it to this church in time for worship. So to do this, she had to do, it was almost like a military operation. So she had to, scope out the whole place. And so we had 6 different entrances to the church there. And so there were 2 that went into the auditorium. So there was a class in there. And then there were 2 that went into the fellowship hall. And there was a class or always somebody back there getting coffee or whatever. So that she couldn't go in those 2 because then someone might see her. And if someone saw her, then they were going to probably ask Dale later, hey, I saw Amanda this morning. What happened to her? Where'd she go? And she didn't want, anybody to notice. So, and didn't want Dale to get in trouble for her not being there anymore. So she decided she'd go in this one side door that led directly to our classroom. So she decided that she would wait for Sunday school to actually start, the time for it to start. So she got there, she goes in the doorway, she's walking down the hallway, and around the corner comes the deacon who is taking the attendance for Sunday school. And she runs right into him. And of course, he's the kind of man who is going to be all up in your business, let me just tell you. So he probably asked her why she was late and where she was going and what she was doing and all about her family and how they were, anyway, they probably had a 10-minute conversation. But she was so embarrassed that had happened. So the next week, she planned to arrive 5 minutes after that. That way, he would have already done the attendance. Well, God had other plans. So the next week she gets there and she goes up to that doorway and she starts to open it and it's locked. Well, looking back on it, she knows that it wasn't just a mistake that someone made, that they had forgotten to unlock the door. She knows that it was God. God locked the door. He blocked her escape route. Okay? So there was only one other doorway that she could get in. And this was the breezeway door. So this one, anyway, it's about a 2-foot, you got to step up on a 2-foot porch little thing. And in front of it was this garden area with all these flowers. Okay. And that year, Milton, the gardener, he must have had the greenest thumb that ever existed because we had more flowers that year than we had ever had. And most of them were rose bushes. So you can just imagine how this is about to go. All right. So Amanda decides she's just going to do it. And so she steps into tries to go in between the rose bushes. But about 2 steps in, the rose bush attacks. And it tears a 2-inch gash into her favorite khakis. And she just stops and looks down. And she's bleeding. And she's stuck in the thorns. And she has to try to tear herself out. And so standing there in that garden, she realizes that whether she moves forward or she moves backward, it's going to hurt. And she didn't mean she was going to get hurt with just moving through the rose bushes. She meant that the way things were going, okay, God was leading her to leave the church, and he meant for her to leave that church. And by going forward like that and following God, she was going to have to leave Dell and Ashley and me behind at Choctaw. Or she was going to have to go backwards, which meant she was going to have to give up all these other churches that she was trying to, do on the side. And she was going to lose herself in the process. So she felt like she hit rock bottom at that point. And here she was, literally trapped in thorns, having a wrestling match with God in the middle of a rose garden. So isn't that the perfect picture, though, of what wrestling with God feels like? You're stuck between two painful choices, bleeding, knowing that no matter which direction you choose, somebody's going to get hurt. And that's when we discover that you can't escape the wrestling. You can only decide who you're going to wrestle with. So in that painful, absurd moment, Amanda's wrestling revealed the three things that she was holding on to. One, she wanted to control the outcome. Two, she was so scared of causing pain that she wouldn't make a decision. And then three, she just didn't want to trust God. She did not trust that God could handle her family better than she could. So step 3. She finally made it to class after digging herself out of the rose bushes. She was torn, bleeding, emotionally spent, and all I had to do was take one look at her and I knew what she was fixing to say. And so with the morning sun streaming in behind her and tears filling her eyes, she mouthed the words, "I can't do this anymore." And my response was immediate. "I told you, would you please just leave? I'm gonna be fine." But my blessing was not enough. So she had to go home and talk to Dell about it. And when she told him that, that she was going to have to leave, that there just wasn't another choice, he actually surprised her. He gave her his full blessing. And for the first time in 2 years, she actually felt the weight lift and experienced genuine peace, the kind that comes when you finally surrender, when you release control and trust that God has this. And then Dale did something even more remarkable. When he met with the other elders to resign his position, he told them, "I could ask her to stay and watch her die on the vine, or I can let her go and watch her thrive somewhere else." And so what's really interesting, though, is that her surrender didn't just free her, it also freed her daughter. So by releasing her own need to keep her family together in one church, Amanda gave Ashley permission to follow her own calling, because Ashley voiced that she wanted to go to Formosa Baptist full time, and Amanda and Dale couldn't say no. And so Ashley went there and she thrived. She started in the youth group, but eventually became a youth leader, even guiding the Wednesday night activities. She attended Camp Siloam and loved it so much that she worked there this past summer as a counselor and a lifeguard, and she's already signed up to do it again this summer. And she also does like 20 other things at school at Arkansas Tech now, all church-related kind of stuff. So the change in churches, changed Amanda's life, but it also changed her daughter's life. So just imagine where her daughter might have been if Amanda hadn't taken that step like she was supposed to. All right, step 4 is the scar. So when Amanda started attending Grace, Terry was ironically preaching a series called Dry Bones. So week after week, she listened to the messages about God breathing life into dead places, and she felt something awakening inside her. The dry, brittle places in her faith were coming back to life. And then I didn't tell her I was doing this part. She's read most of this, but this part I hadn't told her. So just as Jesus' scars proved that he followed God's will and God's timing, even though he had to go through the agony of the cross. Amanda's scar is her proof that obedience to God's timing brings life, not death. So this season of wrestling left Amanda with a permanent reminder that God is in control, not her. And she's learned that she can't ultimately rely on anyone but God. And so it also has transformed how she lives day to day. So over the past couple of years, now when God nudges her, because he seems to do that quite often here lately, he nudges her to do little task or whatever. So like he may nudge her to go visit a former bank customer who's at the nursing home. And so she does it. Or he might tell her to invite the Walmart curbside pickup associate to church and then to her home. And she does it. Or he might ask her to ask a friend about her spiritual life. And she does it. And she's getting better at it. And she's doing it more quickly, closer to his timing now, and not questioning what he's asking. So she's definitely learned from her scar. So let's wrap it up. So let's end with a few reminders. God doesn't condemn us for wrestling with him. He engages with us. So whether you're questioning his timing or his methods or his plan, he's not threatened by your wrestling. He honors it because it means you're engaged with him, not excluding him. He also has included many of the Psalms in the Bible just to show us that honest wrestling is part of your authentic faith. So stop apologizing if you have questions. Stop feeling guilty if you have struggles. Stop thinking that good Christians don't wrestle with God, because yes, they do. Instead, bring your fears and your frustrations and your midnight wrestling matches to him. He is big enough to handle your wrestling, and he's loving enough to wrestle back. And remember that your struggle is going to reveal what you're really holding on to. It may be your reputation, or your timeline, or your children's choices, your health, or your financial security. And the wrestling is going to keep on happening until you will answer honestly, what is your name, who are you really, and what are you holding on to? Because until you can name it, you can't surrender it. And surrender isn't giving up, it's giving over. It's not quitting the fight, it's changing who you're fighting with. When you stop fighting against God and start wrestling with him, then your struggle becomes sacred. It becomes worship. The goal isn't to stop caring, it's to care deeply while just holding on loosely. And of course, your struggles are going to leave scars. So the season of wrestling with God over your prodigal child is going to leave you with a deeper understanding of his heart for the lost. The year that you fought cancer while clinging to his promises will give you a faith that can encourage others in their darkest moments. Because these aren't scars to hide, they're your testimonies to display. And Paul understood this because he wrote in 2 Corinthians 1, 4 and 5, he comforts us in all of our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort that God has given us. For the more we suffer for Christ, the more God will shower us with his comfort through Christ. God doesn't waste our wrestling. He transforms our scars into our story and our wounds into our witness. They're proof that, like Jacob, you've been in the wrestling ring with God and lived to tell about it. So here's my challenge. Here's what I want you to do this week. Find a quiet moment and tell God the truth. Not the sanitized version that we like to tell people at church, but the real, raw truth about what you're wrestling with. Name it out loud and then ask him, what am I really holding on to? And what do I need to surrender? And don't be surprised if he shows you that something that you didn't expect. And then what are you supposed to do? You're going to release your grip. Just a little, just enough to say, your will, not mine. And that's when the transformation will begin and your wrestling will become worship. Thank you.
As the band is coming, I want to share a short story for you. That was excellent, Kim. Very, 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 very good. I was watching the gathering, the Turning Point gathering at Ole Miss last Monday night. There were like 30,000 students there, and the vice president was there. He was a close personal friend of Charlie Kirk's, and he wanted to do what Charlie did. So he fielded questions from these students for an hour and a half. The vice president. So one of the questionnaires, one of the college students, a girl, said about, talked about his faith. He said, my faith in Christ determines everything I do, everything. He said, but I come from a generation where you had faith, but you didn't talk about it. You're just quiet about it in the public arena. He said, Charlie changed that for me. I'm no longer quiet about it. I want everybody to be a Christian. So this girl is thinking the same thing that me and everybody else is thinking. You're married to a Hindu woman. She said, how do you get along? How does that mix? You want everybody to be a Christian. You're outspoken in your faith, and everything you do is decided by your faith in Christ, and you're living with a woman with a different religion. And I'm not talking about a Baptist and Methodist and Church of Christ. I'm talking about the Hindu religion. And he said something, and I was so impressed with what he said. And I thought about it when you talked about Amanda, when she finally talked to Dale. He said, the vice president said, we talk about it. We don't shove it to the side. We talk about it. I can't make her be a Christian. Everybody has to make up their own mind. I know that. She can't make me be a Hindu. She has her own mind. I can't change that. Only God can change that, change her heart. And he said, when he said, we talk about it, I thought, how many couples in the world struggles, separation, divorce, somehow they don't get down to just talking about it. Let's talk about it. And then he said this. He said, and that's what Dale and Amanda did. That's awesome. That is awesome, awesome. Because if you love one another, you'll come to some understanding. And he said that. And he said, we have decided to raise our children as Christians. I think he's got 2 kids. They both go to Christian schools. But we decided that together. I thought, wow, that's really good. And thank you for that message and sharing about yourself and about Amanda. And that was, what a blessing. Yeah. What a blessing. What a blessing. I was very, very, very moved. Okay, before I start crying up here, let's stand up and sing, worship for the Lord.